Good morning, folks. We want to finish up chapter 6 today. So what you want to do is turn to page 194 of your textbook, and we will look at the two types of ossification. As you look on page 194, you'll see bone formation down at the bottom and ossification. That's where we're going to be coming from. So as you look at this second column, you see the big word ossification. Some people might say osteogenesis, the making of bone, the production of bone, the creating of bone. So either way, you can use those terms. And as you read through that little paragraph, in that second column, you're going to see let's see, let me get this pen here, just underline it. You come down about the middle of that little first paragraph, you see intramembranous ossification. And then you come down a few more lines, it talks about endochondral ossification. So those are the two types of ossification. Now, as you read a little bit about that intramembranous ossification, what happens is a membrane becomes ossified. If you read the next part about last couple of sentences in that paragraph, you see endochondral ossification, and that is dealing with a cartilage model. So we want to make sure we keep those straight, have some degree of understanding about how the membranes and the cartilage models turn into bone. I sent you a video taken off YouTube that shows intramembranous ossification. And I may just put in a little Zoom thing, maybe today or tomorrow, and I'll let you look at that. Maybe between the two of them, you'll get a fairly good grasp of what intramembranous ossification is all about. The drawings are a little tricky up here at the top. For me, they may not be for you. But anyway, you can see that we're talking about the bones up here, 195, that actually are membranes. Got a frontal section, two parietals, an occipital, and a temporal, and so forth. And so those are membranes that get turned into bone. So they really don't, in my estimation, give enough information about it. But you can read it over and then look at the video. And then if I do a Zoom, maybe that will cinch it. You know what a cinch is? That's what you do when you pull up on a horse's cinch. You can tie it off. And there are other applications too. But anyway, that may open the door and seal it for you in terms of understanding intramembranous ossification. So we're going to go over to page 196, and 196 figure 6.12 speaks to endochondral ossification. And as you notice over on the left, you see you have a hyaline cartilage model. So all our little finger bones and our palms and our arms and legs and so forth, those were produced by endochondral ossification. So we start out with a cartilage model, and we're not going to get into all the details. Don't try and learn it all like that. We're just getting into some basic details about endochondral ossification. So you see the cartilage model on the left on page 196. Move to your right. What we're really interested in is over on page 197, where you see in figure 6.12, part 3. Notice there are 3 ossification centers. And this is a long bone, say like your arm, your ulna, your radius, your femur, or whatever. And it's made out of hyaline cartilage. And at the right time, here we go, this is amazing stuff. In the center of that bone, which would be the diaphysis, that's the shaft between the two ends. The two ends are called epiphyses. In the center of that diaphysis some cells know to become osteoblasts, and they begin laying down layers of bone. Now, if you read through this, you're going to hear about primary bone, secondary bone. We're not going to go there. We're not going to get that deep. So this primary ossification center occurs in the center of the diaphysis. And let's look at it this way. Here's a cartilage model, and in the center of that cartilage model, the osteoblasts become active and they begin laying bone down. And so there's two kinds of bones. There's the cancellous bone, which is spongy, and then there's dense bone, which is called compact. So we start in the center and it begins laying down the bone, and what happens is it starts moving out toward the epiphyses. So it's like a wave action going from the center and it's moving toward the epiphyses, ossifying the cartilage model. At the same time that is occurring, in each epiphysis, there is a secondary ossification layer, center, and it begins to produce compact bone and spongy bone. And so you follow the arrow over to the right, and you see spongy bone up at the top, and also there's some articular cartilage, right? What does articular cartilage do for us? Good question, right? And then you see that down at the other end, and you see all this stuff that looks like a sponge. Most of you have had a sponge in your life at one time or another, whether you're washing a car or whether you're wiping a floor, whether you're cleaning dishes or something like that. So you have spongy bone in the epiphyses that makes the bone lighter. It's still strong, but it makes the bone lighter. And you see between the spongy bone and the compact bone, which is being laid down by those ossification centers, there is a plate between the epiphyses and the shaft, the diaphysis. That cartilage plate continues to grow, and it pushes the epiphyses outward. It pushes them away from the center, so the bone grows in length. How long is that bone going to be when it gets through? Well, there's several factors that play into that, and that helps determine whether you're going to be 6 feet or 5 feet or 7 feet or whatever. But you get the picture, don't you? Eventually, the epiphyseal plate, which is actively dividing and pushing the epiphyses away from the diaphysis, that's longitudinal growth, eventually it turns to bone. And it becomes an epiphyseal line at that point. That means that bone is not going to grow in length anymore. So we look over on page 197. Let's go over to, we already know how they grow in length. So let's look on page 200. Page 200, and you see in the second column, growth in width. And as you look through there, in that paragraph, the first thing you see is appositional growth, which means the bone will grow in width. So these ossification centers are turning the bone into longer bone, is actually turning the cartilage into long bone, and they eventually stop that. Hormones stop that. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And now your bone can grow this way. Appositional growth. That's what they call it. Fancy name for growing in diameter. Let's look over on page 201. And there's quite a bit here that I want you to read on page 201. The role of hormones in bone growth. So as you begin to read through that first column, you will run across the word hormones. It's about 868 lines down. You'll see it in italics. And then you'll read a little bit more and you'll see it says an important hormone is growth hormone. Sometimes you'll see that abbreviated HGH, and that would be human growth hormone. We need that in order to grow taller. There are people who have a deficiency of that, and they are small. They don't reach what we would consider a normal average height of 5'2", 5'7", 6'1", 6'3", so forth. And that's determined a lot of times by genetics. But that growth hormone is going to help the bone grow appositionally as well as longitudinally. Okay? So it's going to get longer and also wider. Now, we're not going to get into all that, how that occurs. We know mitosis occurs, and then you lay down the calcium substance, the inorganic matrix, which we call hydroxyapatite, and then you've got the organic side of the bone, which gets laid down to the collagen fibers and so forth. So let's look, about growth hormone now. Let's look at the last paragraph, not the second, but I guess it is the second. It's the third paragraph. Second hormone with a pronounced effect on bone growth is testosterone. Obviously works for the guys. Notice what it does. It increases appositional bone growth, causing bones in males to become thicker than in the females. You see it says greater calcium salts or greater amounts of calcium salts are deposited in there. Testosterone also increases the rate of mitosis of the epiphyseal plate, which means it makes it occur faster, grow longer. And so the large increases in testosterone occurring during the teenage years, and you get these growth spurts. Sometimes you go off to college and you get a growth spurt. I went to college and it was kind of interesting. I was 170 pounds, 6 feet 6'1". I came home about 6'1", I weighed 190. Things changed in your body, and so it's like you fill out. And I pumped iron back when I was an athlete in high school. Never could get over 170 pounds. I got strong, but I couldn't muscle out, so to speak. Anyway, you come down to, increases longitudinal growth, also accelerates the closure of the epiphyseal plates. Over in the second column, you see underneath the A and P in the real world, and we're going to talk about that in a second, you see female sex hormone, estrogen, also plays a role in bone growth. So you can read through that and how it does basically the same thing, but ladies are usually shorter than the guys are. Now, that's not a rule, is it? No, it's not a rule. You remember that lady that played, and I can't think of her name, who played for USC? Boy, she was so good, wonderful person, and a great athlete, but she was probably 6'3", 4", something like that. Most girls are not that tall. Anyway, you get the picture. So hormones play a role in the length as well as the diameter of the bone. Now, once the epiphyseal plate has been ossified, the bone does not grow anymore in length. Can it grow appositionally or in width? Yes, it can. And so the more you exercise, and there again is a homeostasis, your bones can grow in width and they become stronger. That's why it's good to go up the stairs. That's one of the reasons I parked down here by the creek. Is I've got to go up 3 flights of stairs, and then I come down 3 flights. And of course, I go to the bookstore and things like that, and I'll have to come back up. And so that's good for my bones. And my bones probably are not as good as yours are, because at 73, things just don't work as well as they used to. It's kind of disappointing, to say the least. But anyway, you get the picture. Okay, exercise is good. Now, here's a couple of problems that can come about. as you look at the top of that second column on page 201, A and P in the real world, read about giantism and acromegaly. Two conditions. One occurs before the epiphyseal plate has become a line. The other one occurs after the plate has been ossified. Make sure you understand that. Somebody might ask you a question. Now, let's look over on page 202. And we're looking at bone remodeling. Bone is not a static tissue. It is a dynamic tissue. It's changing all the time, replacing worn out bone, so to speak, and maybe some cracks or whatever that have occurred. So I want you to read that first paragraph. It talks about bone remodeling, bone deposition, bone resorption. What cells are involved in that? You should know that. For not this week, everybody listening, not this week. Don't text me or email me and tell me when's the test. I'm telling you, the test is not this week. It's next week, okay? So also look at your syllabus and you'll find your schedule and you'll see when the test is going to be offered. So you look in the second column, it talks about the process of bone remodeling. It mentions the cells that are involved in deposition and those in resorption. Notice in that same second column in the middle, bone remodeling in response to tension and stress. I was watching some video on YouTube, and it was big athletes and so forth. And there was one lady in there that could deadlift 400 pounds. Now, you figure them picking up 400 pounds, those thigh bones, those leg bones, hip bones have got to be much thicker than the average female. She's putting a lot of pressure on those bones, and those bones homeostatically respond so that they don't crack under the compression of 400 pounds being placed upon them. And of course, she weighed a pretty good bit herself. So I think she was well over 200-300 pounds, but she was real thick and muscular. Anyway, I want you to read about that. And then you look on page 203, other factors influencing bone remodeling, and you can highlight these and know what they are. Calcium, vitamin D, and I don't know, most of us might not get a lot of sun. Now, I told you the doctor told me to get out there a couple of times a week and catch the sun for about 15 minutes. And so I do, and I guess it's okay. But we need vitamin D. Then you see vitamin C. Notice what it's required for, because bone has collagen fiber in it. Those are proteins. Collagen's a type of protein. Vitamin K is necessary, and protein intake. So you've got, where do you get protein? You can get it from meats. Most of us like beef, and we like pork, barbecue and so forth. And you could just go on down the line. Beans have proteins in them. Nuts are a good source of protein without the saturated fats and so forth. The nuts are really good for us. So anyway, you want to know that. Bone remodeling and calcium ion homeostasis. Here we are again with that term. See how that was back in chapter 1, and it's going to keep coming back to you. That's why you want to know chapter 1 and chapter 2. We're building on that. So as you look on, let's see, we here are on page 203. Look at the figure 615. How do we keep calcium in the bloodstream in the right amount? Again, homeostatic mechanism. And so you see down here that the top of the little illustration, if blood calcium drops. This is amazing to me. fascinating. It's just, in our parathyroid glands, which are embedded in the dorsal wall of the thyroid gland, they have receptors. That's amazing to me. Receptors. It's just like your computer has a receptor for Wi-Fi. So how'd that get there? Well, it had to be put there by intelligence, right? So we've got these receptors that don't contract. They don't send electrochemical messages from one part of the body to the other. They have receptors that know when the calcium level is correct. If the calcium level drops, notice what it says. Parathyroid gland cells detect the low calcium level. And what do? Follow that arrow down to the bottom of the page and you see PTH. And PTH is an abbreviation for parathyroid hormone. So there are cells that are in communication, maybe through desmosomes or something like that, or gap junctions, but they pick up the fact that the calcium levels are low. So the parathyroid gland cells produce parathormone, and parathormone, if you follow the arrow, does three things. You see, it causes osteoclasts to become more active. And that's going to take take calcium out of the bone and go and put it in the blood. At the same time, it has another effect on the kidneys. It causes the kidneys to retain more. There's that communication, cell-to-cell communication. Hormones produced up here, but it has its effects in the kidneys as well as the bones. And the kidneys start reabsorbing more calcium. And notice also, if we have calcium in our diet, the parathormone causes the intestine to reabsorb more calcium from the food that we eat. You don't have to worry about it. It works. It's a beautiful mechanism. Fascinating, just absolutely fascinating. And of course, the level in the bloodstream comes up, and okay, we're all happy now, and we're all set for that, for the calcium to be ready in the right place. Excuse me. You can read through 204, basically what we just went over. But then down at the bottom, it says the response to an increase in the number of calcium ions in the blood. Different response, it's going to bring them down. But let's look at what happens. It says the first response is a decline in parathyroid hormone secretion. Next, secretion of the hormone calcitonin is triggered. This hormone is produced by the cells of the thyroid gland. Not only does the thyroid gland produce what we would call thyroid hormone, but it again has receptors that can detect the calcium level and then stimulate the cells, the particular cells in that gland that produce calcitonin. And calcitonin, as you see, produced by the cells of the thyroid gland located right under here, okay? And it has the opposite effect of parathyroid hormone. So instead of causing the osteoclasts to become active, it causes the osteoblasts to put down more calcium in the bone, and we store that calcium. It's kind of like a bank account. So if we ever need calcium, we can withdraw, and then we replenish the account so we have it in the future. But you can read about that, and you want to be able to differentiate the two actions that can occur, be able to explain them, and have an understanding of how you don't think about anything. I don't think about anything in terms of calcium. I drink milk because I like it, and then the doctor said to do that anyway. But And that's a full milk, not this skim white water, but good milk, And you come down to the next paragraph says vitamin D plays an important role in calcium homeostasis. If vitamin D is absent, few calcium ions are absorbed and so forth. You can read about that. So we need all these things in our body. And if we eat a good diet, instead of eating just potato chips and whatever sandwiches or whatever junk food, and I like junk food too, so don't feel bad. But we got to have basically a good diet, and then we can get calcium in our bodies. Okay, make sure you can do the quick check. And let's see if we come on to do a couple more things here. On page 205, you see types of fractures. People break bones all the time. I broke my bones when I was a kid. I had it was sort of a comminuted type break like that. That bone sort of can slide. Well, yeah, it's kind of like that comminuted. They sort of slid past each other. So my arm, instead of being like this, was like that. Had a step in it. And you go, ah! Anyway, got it fixed. I could work. I could do the computer and so forth. It took them a while to fix it. They had to do a lot of pulling and tugging on me and all that. Three doctors were working on it. But anyway, you want to know a spiral fracture and a comminuted fracture, a green stick, and a compression, which a lot of times occurs, as you see there, in the vertebral column. So those are breaks. And then how does the bone heal? Got 4 easy steps. And so you want to be able to explain each of those steps on page 206. Nothing heavy. Just read over it. A hematoma. You probably had the word oma as a vocabulary term, and hema means blood. So it's like a little blood growth, isn't it? We think about carcinoma, and that's a growth or whatever. But here you have a growth of blood cells. And that's what happens after the bone is broken. And of course, you got to get it reset when they oppose each other here in the sense of being opposite each other in the tissue, wherever it is. In my case, it was the arm. And then you see what happens. Fibroblasts and chondroblasts grow in that area, and they form a soft callus. And we've already talked about a callus. You do certain kinds of work, you get calluses here. Get calluses here if you play an instrument, a stringed instrument. I don't think you get it when you do it on the piano. I have not asked anybody about that, but I know with stringed instruments you get a callus. So you get a soft callus, and then you see in number 3 the osteoblasts begin to lay down the inorganic matrix and the organic matrix, and you get a bony callus, and the bony callus is remodeled. And it works pretty good. Now, if you looked at an X-ray of my two arms and compared them, you would see that this bone over here in the left arm has a little bulge, just a little. You can see that, but it's been remodeled. See, a little wider than this one. It's a little wider than this one. Excuse me. So works good. Got a good doctor. Put them back together again. You have to keep it still for about 4, 5, 6 weeks. Then they take it off, and then you got to go through the therapy. Got to turn it. Boy, my mother was a nurse, and she'd turn it this way, turn it that way to get it back into the condition where it would work. It wasn't fun. It hurts a little bit. She'd push it a little bit, and then she'd pull back, and then she'd go the other way. But it got done. I'm glad she did it. And sometimes, we have to go through pain in order to get back to normal or to grow in terms of some aspect of our lives. All right, that takes care of chapter 6. So I hope you have some success in understanding this. This is the last chapter that we'll have on the second exam next week. Don't email me and ask me a question like that. I already told you, and it's also in your schedule. Look it up. All right? Okay. Y'all have a good day, and we'll talk with you later. Bye-bye.